This is Jamie Steinberg with Starry Constellation Magazine. Darrell, this is just such a beautiful movie.
Oh,
Were
thank
you
you.
always in mind to play Frank?
You know what?
That's a good question.
That is a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was because it was this was kind of like I felt like it was my Rocky moment because I don't think anybody wanted me to be Frank. I told somebody earlier today that if I hadn't written this film, I would have never gotten an audition for Frank, which is kind of crazy. But it's the reality. But yeah, I think I knew Frank so well after writing him and having lived with him for as long as I did. So it was like just felt like it was the natural fit for me to be him, and that I hope I did a decent job. So
The storyline is just outstanding because it's a unique take on this love story.
yeah.
What inspired this?
There's a little bit of my life, and then there's just sort of like what I've wanted to always see. There's pieces of in sort of an ex of mine, her sister was diagnosed with cancer, and I remember sort of trying to figure out my space within that and trying to, and she was always like, "Well, I need you to be who you are." Because everybody around me is changing and seeing her sister for the first time and thinking that she was going to be one way and she was still her exuberant, beautiful, joyful self. And I was like, wow, Hollywood has this sort of weird way of depicting sickness and like, and also just like the idea of like weak women in film. I think that there is this slight obsession that Hollywood has with that. And I think in reality, there's just so many strong women. And I only know strong women. Women have saved my life. I haven't saved theirs. And so I was like, if I can sort of find a way to do something like this, I would really want to explore that in film because I hadn't seen it in a while. And especially when it looks like, when it's like two black people falling in love and dealing with this kind of stuff and it not being, the typical trauma stories that we get a lot of.
Nate, the chemistry between Arsema and Darrell is just exceptional on screen. How was it for you when you're behind the camera watching these scenes?
Um, well, that's a great question. I felt the same way. Daryl and Arsema put so much work into the characters. Um, we talked through so many things about character backstories and, just making sure that these characters felt lived in and that we were going to be able to honor this story and honor this situation that we know um, a lot of people out there are dealing with, going through.
Mm.
Um, so it was, there were times where watching Arsema, watching Daryl, I was tearing up in the back, that I would get a little outer body to where, a minute goes by and they're looking at me like, are you going to call cut? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I forgot that was what I was here to do. Um, yeah.
Daryl, is there a moment from page to screen that just really you're most proud of how it turned out?
That's a great question. I think so much of it I'm so proud of. I'm like, because I think a lot of people ask me like, they don't like, I don't like to watch the thing I've done, and I love it. I love watching it. I really do find myself watching it and getting lost in it. Because I think that's a testament to sort of Nate's style. I mean, he's just like, I've said it before and I'll keep saying it, that he's just a painter who happens to sit behind a camera. He truly, truly is an artist. And I think that it's just such a beautiful to watch his work. It's almost like every time I watch it, I see something new. And I'm like, and call Nate like, man, did you mean to do, you know what I mean? Because I'm just like, I'm like just in awe of his work. And so I think like the page to screen, there's just so many moments where I'm just like, wow, like you really did that.
Is there a moment then, Nate, that you're most proud of the performance you got out of these wonderfully talented actors?
Um, Absolutely. Daryl and I speak about this scene where Frank is the outside of the hospital. And it's like he's talking to his mother and it's this It's this scene that we knew was coming. We prepared for it for a while, but you know, eh, we were just talking about it recently, and the layers of, how Frank was hiding his emotions, hiding himself, being able to be vulnerable, and then us putting him in a place where he can no longer be vulnerable to the audience, but he's still hiding behind this pillar, So it's like, Daryl speaks about characters not making a true A to Z, a change. It's more like a A to C, or like a A to 8.1, in a lot of cases, and it's these small nuanced moments. It's being able to see Molly just really in all of her scenes, really, really bring me so much joy, because, reading the script, it's like, you know, Molly is the story, she's the heartbeat. Without, her performance, without the things coming through that really work, um, you don't have the movie. But to answer your question, outside of that scene, the grocery store scene, every time I
Yes.
see it, I was like, oh God, it just, you're like, now the film is starting, you know?
Daryl, what do you hope lingers with audiences that watch this movie? Is it love unconditionally? Is it let your heart be open? Is it all of those things, or even maybe something I haven't even suggested?
Well, it's definitely all those things, like truly, because I do think the idea of like the unconditional love is such a beautiful thing that I think that we get into these spaces of like talking about how like we have conditions on love. It's sort of like you're in a relationship with somebody, then you get out of the relationship and you're like, I never loved that person, or it's sort of like, nah, like you loved that person and that's okay. And it's like the sort of finding the spaces. And I think in terms of like what I would want people to feel is I just want them to feel what they feel and be okay with that. I think I try not to get into a space of telling somebody what I hope for them to feel, because I do know that I have that inside of me, but it's almost like if I tell you that, then you start to think, well, okay, I want to make sure I feel that. And it's like, no, you should feel what you feel. And allowing yourself to be open to that, because I do think that the world is can be so divisive and it can be so dark. And I do believe the only thing that can get us out of that is love. And I just hope that we can sort of spread more of that light into the world, because it's really what we need. And I think it's what we're all searching for in some way.